Hello, and welcome to this tutorial for Lightkey, the versatile and intuitive software designed for creating and controlling dynamic light shows. Lightkey is one of the primary apps that we use for lighting control here at Lightsmiths. In this tutorial, we'll go over the core features as well as some tips and tricks so that you will be comfortable showing up to a venue, setting up the lights, and getting Lightkey ready to go. Let's get started. At its core, Lightkey generates and sends DMX information from the computer out to the various lighting fixtures. Well, what the heck is DMX? Think of DMX as the language that the computer uses to communicate with the various lights around the venue. It can be used to control brightness or color or a whole bunch of other settings depending on the light. We'll go over this more in the future when we talk about patching and addressing DMX fixtures. Let's take a look at Lightkey and see what it is we're working with. If we go down to the icon bar on the bottom of the screen, you'll see this kind of disco ball looking icon. That's Lightkey. So we'll click on that and we're presented with the opening page. Down below are the most recent files that have been opened. And odds are pretty good that the file you're looking for will live down here, since more often than not we like to pre-program things ahead of time, so just a few final tweaks at the venue and everything's ready to go. However, much like any other application in the last 20 or 30 years, if we go up to the File menu, we click on Open, we will see the Finder where we can select whatever project we want to open. If you're not taken right to the Lightkey folder, simply click on Lightkey on this left-hand bar and it'll take you right there. This is a Dropbox folder, so everything is synced up, nice and safe. However, for today, we're going to open up this 24 Freedoms 4 Beams version 1, which is a template that I created to help speed up the process. We got a layout, we've got some fixtures already in place, so hopefully we just tweak the colors and we're off and running. So what are we looking at here? This area in the upper left is the preview window. So each one of these icons represents a lighting fixture. We can have different types of lighting fixtures. So you can see these down here are representing moving heads. These around the perimeter are uplights. On the right-hand side, we have a series of presets. And we'll get a little bit more into these later. But just know that these are kind of preset animations and colors. Some color gradients, some animations with the colors, etc. To help programming go quite a bit faster. So presets over here, preview here, this area down below, which currently says no selection, leads me to believe I should select something. And when I do, we now have some controls. Since these are simple uplights, we only have a couple controls. We have the dimmer, and if we turn that up, we can see the preview reflects the fact that we brought the dimmer up on the lights. Additionally, we have a color wheel. And if we just click around anywhere on the wheel, it will change to that color and update the preview as well. Additionally, within the color wheel, we have a half circle that controls saturation. So if you'd rather create a pastel color, you can do that. Also, to the right-hand half of the half circle is just the regular dimmer. So if you only want it to be half bright, this is where you would adjust that. Now we'll notice that we have two controls for the uplights, but if I were to select a moving head, I get a whole bunch more controls, which means that the controls will update based on which fixture that you have chosen, which is great. So theoretically, if I were to bring the dimmer up on this moving head light, choose something on the color wheel, maybe green, we can see that the icon updates to be green. We also have access to the gobos, the shutter and strobe, as well as two prisms on these particular fixtures. And last, over on the right-hand side, lower right I should say, you will see the shortcuts area. And all that is whenever you click on something, it will update and let you know what the shortcuts are available for that particular feature. Above the controls, you will see Design and Live. We're currently in Design. That's what gives us these controls. If we go over to Live, now we're in the playlist. So if we double click on a playlist, the animation will come live, and this is going to run through various different animations and different programming that we did ahead of time. So we can just fire off the playlist and let this thing run while people are dancing or whatever the event happens to be. Additionally, right next to where it says live, you'll see a little arrow, and that gives us a drop down, which means we can have multiple pages of either lighting cues or what they call a control panel. We're not going to go super deep into this, but just so you know it's there, this is an area where we can create custom buttons and faders and essentially whatever we want so that we can create our very own custom control panel if, say, we're doing some live event work and we need to be able to just press buttons and have the lights respond immediately. For today, however, we'll go back to the dance playlist because more often than not, this is where you're going to be. Let's look at the anatomy of a playlist. Similar to iTunes, a playlist is a list of cues that runs from top to bottom. Each of these cues represents a specific look that you have pre-programmed for the lights. If we double-click on a cue, we can see that the update, or the preview rather, updates, so we can see roughly what it's going to look like. We can double-click on a different one and see what it's going to be doing, etc. You'll also see these little check boxes off to the left-hand side. If we uncheck a cue, what that means is when we hit play, it's going to skip that particular cue. So only cues that have the check mark are going to show up in the actual live show. Now this can be useful if you show up to a venue, you need to make a couple of quick tweaks, and maybe the bride has said that she hates the color green. Well, we just uncheck any of the cues that have the color green and leave the rest. Nice and easy. The names of the individual cues, we can click on those 2 slow clicks, not a double click, but 2 slow clicks will open that up, and you can rename it to anything useful that you might need to. Next to that, we have little override dials. So hypothetically, we double click on this first cue, and we want to change the colors, but we don't want to go in and reprogram everything. That's what the little overrides are for. If we click on this palette and hold the mouse button down, you'll see the hue percentage is there, and we can actually change that to a different color, and the update as well as the lights themselves will change right then. This is a great example because it is worth noting these moving headlights use colored gels rather than RGB colors. And what that means is there's a colored film that goes in front of a white light bulb to make the color. And you cannot change that in the same smooth fashion that you can as an RGB light. The upside of that is the colors themselves are a bit more saturated and just look better in general. Other overrides, we have the speed override. So we can speed this up and you'll see that the moving heads are now scooting right along. The animation for the uplights is going faster. We'll bring that back down to 1. And finally, this little crosshair is for focus. So if these moving heads are projecting a gobo on the back wall, a gobo is just a pattern. If we're projecting a gobo on the back wall, but it's not quite focused, we do the same procedure here, and we can focus it real time while we're looking at it so everything looks nice and sharp. Next to the overrides, we have the hold time and fade time. Fairly self-explanatory, but once you click play and the playlist is running, the hold time is how long it stays on that particular cue, and the fade time is how long it takes to blend from one cue to the next cue. So if we want to run the whole playlist, we just hit play. And we can see that it started down here on number 11. I was messing with that earlier. It's going to drop down to 12, boom, etc., etc. When it gets to the end, it's going to loop back around to number 1 and just keep on going. Now, while the playlist is going, let's say that we hit a look that we don't want it to change for a while. If we hit pause, then it's going to stay on this particular cue until you unpause it. So if we unpause that, we can see the little meter is running again, and as soon as that runs out, it's going to transition to the next cue. If you're on a cue that you just want to skip real quick, that's what this button is here. It just automatically jumps right to the next one. And at any point, if you need to stop the playlist, you just hit stop and everything goes out. Okay, so we've got the general idea of how to use Lightkey. We've created a cool playlist, and now we want to actually use that to power the lights. How do we get all this cool stuff out of the laptop and over to our lighting fixtures? Well, we need 2 things in order to make that happen. We need a DMX interface and then we need a cable or a wireless signal to send it off to the lights. If we notice in the upper left-hand corner here, where it says NTEC DMX USB Pro, that is our DMX interface. However, this is red, which means it can't find it. And if it can't find it, we got no show. Well, simply because I unplugged it, which is the reason we can't find it, I'm going to plug it back in now. I'm going to click on it, hit try again. Bink. Now it's nice and gray. That means it is communicating with the DMX interface. The best way to go about this is just to make sure that's plugged in before you fire up Lightkey, and then it'll automatically detect it and you're ready to go. Once you have your DMX interface plugged in and working, we need to send the DMX signal from the interface, like I said, either down a cable over to our lights or preferably over to a wireless DMX transmitter so we can send that signal out to all of the lights at the same time. Let's recap what we've learned so far by doing what I will call an easy mode setup. What is an easy mode setup? Well, in this hypothetical scenario, the Lightkey project file has already been programmed, the lights are already addressed, and then we know that there will not be any changes from the client. Nice and simple. So step one is to set up the hardware. First, you want to lay out and power on all of the uplights somewhere close by with their DMX addresses in order. That way we can test everything out before it gets spread around the room. Next, you want to set up the laptop. Ideally, it's going to be placed wherever it's going to live throughout the duration of the event, and there's an outlet close by so we can plug it in. Then we're going to set up the DMX interface with a USB cable. Coming from the DMX interface, we're going to go into the DMX wireless transmitter. Step 2 will be to open Lightkey. Once Lightkey is open, ideally you will see the project file ready to go for you down here. In our case, it is a Lightkey tutorial, the very tutorial you are watching right now. Once we have this opened up, we're going to check that our connections are working correctly. To do this, I'm going to select the uplights. I'm going to bring up the fader, and the lights themselves should be turned on as well. You can also check that the colors are changing correctly, and if everything is responding as it should, then we're in good shape. The next step is to test out the playlist itself. So we go over to the playlist, we make sure that these are all of the cues that we want to use, and we'll say hypothetically, we don't want to do this ice blue, so we'll uncheck that, but everything else is good. We're going to select the first one, we're going to hit play, and we'll watch the lights for a bit. Make sure that the colors are doing what they expect them to do. We'll make sure that the transitions look nice, and everything is essentially as it was expected. Looking good, so we'll hit stop on that. The last thing we'll do is we're going to set the resting state for the lights. Now the resting state is basically just what they're going to look like before any of the dancing and whatnot starts. Typically, this is warm white for the uplights, and the moving heads themselves are completely off. So we select the uplights, we have the dimmer all the way up. We're going to turn this to a pure white, which doesn't look awesome, so we're going to add in some of this amber to a nice warm white. It looks nice and elegant. Before we wrap up, I want to point out an important potential gotcha that could be very frustrating if you don't know how to fix it. And it simply means, how do we clear overrides? The overrides, and they live up here, are the things that we do manually to the lights. So by dialing in a nice warm white, that is an override. Well, the challenge with overrides is if we go over to the playlist, and let's say we select the first one, we double click on that, and we can see that the moving heads are doing their thing, but the uplights are still warm white. What the heck? Well, overrides take precedent over a playlist, but they're super easy to get rid of. All you do is go up to this kind of a broom looking icon, you click on that, they're all gone, and we're back to the correct programming. So remember, if your lights aren't responding the way you expect them to when you start up a playlist, just double check that there aren't any overrides getting in your way. Once you've verified that everything is working as expected, you can go ahead and place the lights around the venue. and then move on to whatever other setup task you may have. That's it. Now that we've had a chance to take a look at an easy mode project, let's dig a little bit deeper. In this section, we're going to create a new project based on a template. We're going to take a look at the DMX addressing and patching, and creating a new playlist with custom cues. Let's start off by opening a template and taking a look at how the DMX fixtures are all patched together. We're going to start out with 24 freedoms and 4 beams, and we are back to our familiar look here. Before we go any further, I want to point out something that's actually really important, and that is anytime we start from a template, we want to immediately do a save as to create a copy of the original template without affecting it, just the file that we're creating for the specific event. So as we open up our template, we're going to go up to File, choose Save As, and we're going to name it in a specific way. And the way we're going to name it is Date, Venue, Lights. So hypothetically, let's say we are doing a New Year's Eve event at the Four Seasons. So we're going to start with a year, 2024, use a hyphen, and that is December 31st. Then we're going to add the venue, Four Seasons, and then finally the lights. We don't have to list everything, but we just want to have a gist of what we were setting up for that particular event. So as we're looking through these files later, we get a sense of what's going to be there. So we know we've got 24 ups, we've got 4 movers, and we've got 12 wash lights. Boom. Now with that saved, we can make any changes we want to this. We can delete things, we can add things, and it's not going to affect the original template. So future projects based on that template are all starting from the same place. The first thing we want to look at is how everything is addressed. To do that, we're going to go up in the left-hand corner to this little icon right here. We click on that, and wow, this big giant screen comes sliding in looking kind of crazy. Don't worry, it's not as bad as it looks. What we're looking at here is a list of practically every lighting manufacturer and all of the lights that they create. So the odds are quite good that whatever lighting fixture that you're setting up is going to be in here. On this side, we have the manufacturers, and over on this right-hand panel, we have the individual lights that those manufacturers offer. So hypothetically, let's look for, and we have a search box up here, so let's look for, how about Freedom Pars? So as I type in free, it brings up Chauvet, that's what we're looking for, and they have a whole bunch in their Freedom line, so we would select from there. Super easy to find whatever fixture that you're looking for. On the right-hand side, we have the actual patch matrix. Let's break this down. It starts with a group called a universe. Every universe can have 512 addresses. That's this guy right down here. Each one of these boxes represents an address. Now, if you recall previously in the video, I mentioned that every full color RGB light needs at least 3 different pieces of DMX data in order to set its color. Well, if we look up here, we have Freedom Pars that are already patched in. That's what we have currently in our layout. And if we double click on that, we see that it is a Freedom Par Q9. That's the lights that we're using. And below that, we have a mode. Now, a lot of different fixtures can actually work in different modes. So for example, this is in mode 1 with 4 channels. And all that means is there's a channel for red, a channel for green, a channel for blue, and finally a channel for the dimmer. That's about as simple as you can get. However, if we open this drop down, we see we have a mode 2 with 6 channels and a mode 3 with 14 channels. What gives? Well, the reason they break this out like this is so that either A, you're only using the channels that you need. If we know we're doing all the programming, we don't need anything fancy built into the fixture itself, we're going to keep it simple. And that's what we have here. However, many fixtures have some pretty interesting built-in effects and some programming of their own that if you want to utilize those, you can open it up by using the higher channel modes. We're going to stick with the 4-channel mode number 1 here. If we look up under patching, This is going to tell us the short name, which is just, it's a short name that makes it easier to identify what it is that we're looking at when we're looking in the preview mode. And in the preview window, you'll see, P1, P2, think of that as par 1, par 2. Over here in these kind of purplish, we see MH, that's moving head. So moving head 1, moving head 2, etc. That's how the short names work. Below this, we have the actual address. So this very first fixture is on address number 1. If we click on the next one, get its info, you can see it's labeled P2 and the address starts at 5. So what this means is each one of these little blocks is representing 4 DMX addresses, and they all get placed in there automatically with the addressing done for you. You will also notice that if you look at the individual address blocks in the upper left corner, it shows the starting address for any given fixture, including the moving heads. And you'll notice that the moving heads use up a whole lot more addresses than the par lights do. That's because they do a whole lot more stuff. Having all of these addresses available can be very handy if your lighting fixtures are not yet addressed. So hypothetically, you show up to the venue, the lights still have addresses from some other event, and now we need to readdress all of the fixtures so that they line up with all of these address blocks. Super easy. Just look, we start with 1, next one starts at 5, then 9, etc. Same for the moving heads, 97, 116, etc. Additionally, if we close this down and select a fixture, so say this moving head 3, we're setting everything up and you're like, crap, what is the address supposed to be for this particular fixture? Well, if we select it, we go up to the patch matrix and we can see that moving head number 3 starts at 135. So what happens if we fill up all 512 addresses? Maybe we've got a whole bunch of lights and we need more addresses than just 512. What do we do? Well, that's where additional universes come in. We can add a DMX universe to give us another 512 addresses to work with. The catch is, however, virtually all DMX interface boxes are going to have a limitation to the universes that they provide. Usually it's just one universe, so if you want to have another universe in your setup, you're going to have another device. Or sometimes we'll get a big fancy DMX interface that has 4 or maybe even 8 universes, and we can do all kinds of cool stuff. The only downside of those is you get what you pay for. They're pretty expensive, but if you need it, you need it, so that's what we'll use. That said, more often than not, one universe is plenty for what it is that we do, so we're not going to worry too much about additional universes. It's also worth noting that if we want, we can actually drag these DMX blocks around to change their address. Now, this is not recommended. Typically, we want to let the computer do the automatic addressing for us so everything lines up when we don't have any gaps. But maybe just as a warning, if you do click and drag on these, they will move and it will change the address. We'll go ahead and leave these as they were, and we're going to add some more fixtures so we can see what that process looks like. Let's say, hypothetically, we are using some of our Chauvet wash lights. I believe those are called the H1s. There we go, Freedom H1. So if I double click on that, I'm going to choose Patch Fixture. This is going to start out at the next available address. So for our particular setup, that's 173. And down here, we can add multiple fixtures at the same time. So let's say we want to put a dozen of these in. Boom, there's 12. And you can see this kind of ghosting outline filling up where the DMX addresses would be should we choose to patch them. Well, you betcha, we're going to go ahead and patch them. We click patch. Bam, there's all of our freedoms. Well, now what does that look like on the preview? Let's find out. We're going to click done. And you're going to see animated in, those are all of our freedoms. They come in automatically selected, so we can just click and drag and move them wherever makes sense for our particular setup. Let's say we want to move these in a semicircle for some strange reason. We can drag these around individually and create a layout that at least somewhat closely mirrors what we're seeing in real life, just to kind of get a feel of what the actual production is going to look like. Here, this is not particularly in line, but you get the gist. So now if we click on, well, first we have to, when it adds a fixture, it puts us into the editing workspace for the preview. So we're going to come up here and click done. And now we have all of these that we can select, change the settings. We can select a bunch at once, change those settings. The H1s have an additional white diode. They've got a warm white diode or amber. They've also got a UV. So that's what these particular sliders are for. They can also do some things like strobe and run their own macros and stuff like that. For our purposes, we're just going to go ahead and set the colors ourselves. And this gives us a good opportunity to talk about some of the layout tools that are available in the preview workspace. If we click edit, we can now move these fixtures around again. And let's say, rather than a semicircle, we want to evenly distribute them with 6 on each side. How do we do that and make it look good? Well, we've got some tools to help us out with that. If we move them roughly in place, doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to clean that up in a second. We'll just get these over here, roughly where they're going to be. Put that one there. And you'll notice these little yellow lines that pop up. Those are alignment guides. So right now, P31 is directly across from P30. And that's good for what we want to do. I'm going to take P36, get it roughly in line with P25. And now we can use some of the tools to straighten these out. So if I select everything on this side, I'm going to align these first in the center. So now they're all lined up in a straight line. That's fantastic. And then, whoops. And then we're going to go ahead and distribute them vertically. So you'll notice that now the spacing has worked out to be nice and even. We're going to do the same on this side. We'll see if I can get 31 to line up with 30 like we had it before. Come on, guy. I'll actually scoot this out of the way. It might be confusing it some. There we go. So now we know that corner's in line. We're going to get the bottom one in line. Come on, grab it. There we go. And now we can select all of these and we'll do the same procedure. We're going to center them and then we're going to distribute them vertically. And now we have a nice clean layout to work with and proceed with our programming. Once we get everything in place where we want it, we click done, and now we can get on to programming. While we're building our layout, we do have a nice little quality of life feature that will allow us to group the fixtures together. Well, what does that mean? You'll notice here, if I click on this first uplight, all of the uplights are selected because they're grouped. However, if I click on one of these wash lights, it only selects that individual wash light. Now for the wash lights in this particular setup, I think it would make a lot of sense for those to be grouped as well. We want them working together, whereas say for the moving headlights, maybe they're doing something a bit more independent. The wash lights should work together for this particular event. So let's group those together. To do so, we're going to click and drag around the fixtures that we want to group, in this case our wash lights. Then we are going to click on Edit, which will bring us into the Edit workspace. And then we click on this little dashed rectangle to group those together. Now you see this line goes through it, which means if you click that button again, it will ungroup it. It's also a way to verify that we have successfully grouped our lights. So if we click Done, we go back to our regular design space. If we click on one of them, they're all selected. So uplights are all grouped together, wash lights are all grouped together, but the moving heads are still independent, just the way we want them. Perfect. Now that we have our lights laid out and grouped the way that we want them, let's take a look at some of the programming options that we have. We'll start with the uplights. I'm going to click on the uplights, which of course are grouped, and all of them get selected. Now you might be wondering, why can't I see anything? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to bring the dimmer up. And you can see in the preview, it's showing a bit of a glow around it, simulating the fact that the light is actually on. You can see that the light color is blue. Let's say maybe we want red. So we click red on the color wheel and they're all red. Super simple. As we mentioned before, we can, if we want, pull out some of the saturation to create more of a pink. We can do the same thing with a blue. Same, you know the drill. But maybe we want to get a little bit more fancy. Let's say, for some strange reason, that we want a couple of the lights to be purple. Not all of them, just a few select ones. How would we pull that off? Well, when a light is grouped, or a series of lights is grouped, you can double click on any one of the individual lights and change any of the settings from there. So let's say P5, we're going to make that a light blue. We'll go across the way, get P20, do the same thing, double click on that and make it light blue as well. And we can go from there. Generally speaking, we're going to keep either all the lights the same color or we'll have some sort of an animation, but do know that we have the ability to control individual fixtures even though they're in a group. Now, solid colors can look nice, but they're not super fancy. What else can this thing do? Well, let's take a look. If we go over to this color control, again with all the lights selected, we're going to see in the upper right-hand corner, if we hover the mouse, we get this little arrow. We click on that when you have a few options. The first one is called color fanning, and think of that just like a gradient. Not sure why they call it fanning, but it's effectively a gradient. And when we click on that, we get this interesting little window here. This shows our uplight layout, and it has these blue dots over on the left-hand side. And you can think of those as color stops. If you've ever worked with software such as Photoshop or some other photo editing software, anytime you create a gradient, it's going to have something similar to this. So in this particular case, the very first color stop is next to this light, which has kind of a purplish, pinkish hue to it. And the very last one goes up to blue. Well, let's change that around a bit. Let's take the blue and turn it green, and we'll turn this fuchsia and turn it light blue. Now you can see that the color information is getting divided up and evenly spread and blended from that first blue that we set all the way down to the green. Pretty nice. But wait, there's more. If we come up to fixture order, and I'll point out that even though these two rows of lights are all in line and it makes sense for the gradient to go down them, what about these lights in the back of the room? They're all the same color. How does it know that? Well, the software is aware of your layout, which means if you want a top to bottom gradient, it's going to take into account where the actual fixtures are located. So you get a nice smooth gradient across the room. Super handy. And we can also control which direction it goes. As you can see, top to bottom is what we currently have. We can also go right to left, and you can see it animates and shows you the different color separations and which direction they're going. We can flip it and go left to right, and you can see now that the number 1 spot is on the left-hand side going over to the number 6 spot. If we wanted to wrap around the room in order of the actual addressing, no problem. We go down to address ascending, and it wraps all the way around the room. We'll click on that one just for the sake of example, and you can see our first color spot is over here where we started it, but you have to go all the way around the room to get to the last one. It really just depends on what effect you're looking for. But I gotta tell you, from back in the old days when I had to walk to school 2 miles every day uphill in the snow, this is way easier than individually programming lights to create an effect like this. Let's go back to a top to bottom, and we will accept that. Boom, click out of there. And now we can see our lights have this cool gradient going around the room. When we're working with gradients, we're not even limited to just 2 color stops. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If we want to edit the gradient that we just created, we click on the group of lights again. We're going to go to the color control box, and if we click anywhere where it says fanning, since that effect is in place, it will bring up the control box so we can edit our gradient, or fanning as they call it. So right now we've got 1 color stop at blue, 1 color stop at green. Well, what if we wanted to have something that changes in the middle? Let's say around P6. Well, if we click on that lighting fixture, and let's make it something obvious, we'll make it red, then you will see that we're starting at green, we're blending into red, and then from red, we're blending down to blue. And all the same things apply. If we change the fixture order, we can go right to left, left to right, ascending and descending, all the same stuff. Let's go ahead and accept this. Boop. And we can see now that we have a color fanning setup with 3 color stops instead of just 2. Okay, so that's color fanning. What else can this thing do? Let's take a look. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the lights again. I'm going to click on this broom to get rid of all those overrides. We're going to start fresh. Sometimes having effects stacked up can be a little bit cluttered. So we start fresh. We clear out everything we just did. We're going to bring the dimmer back up, and now we're back to the default blue. So we'll go over to the color controller. We click the drop down, and here we go to color effect. This brings up a big old dialog of all the different effects generators that are available here in Lightkey. We're interested in the color effects, so we go here to the color section. And if we click on any one of these, it'll give us a preview of what that effect is. So we can kind of flip through these, get an idea as to what it's going to do. And then when we find something that we like, or it's at least close to what we want, then we can click Add, and it'll bring up the editing dialog for that specific effect. So if we look here, we can see we've got these bars of color running down in a specific order, and we can change that at a specific speed with specific colors. Well, how do we control all that stuff? Let's start over here in this bottom section, left-hand side, where it says duration. So what that means is it's going to go through and do all of its effect stuff, whatever that is, over the course of 8 seconds. Well, what if we told it to get all that stuff done in 4 seconds? We do that, and you can see it's going much faster. So the duration affects the speed of the effects. We can go up to 4 seconds, and now it's moving much slower. Let's bring that back down to 1 and take a look at the colors themselves. So each color bar coming through is in line with the colors that we're seeing here on this color picker. So if I take red, change that to, I don't know, most everything else is covered. Let's make it a light blue. Then when the red comes around, rather than red, there was our light blue. We can add colors. Let's do a purple there. If we right click on an existing color, we can delete it. So let's say maybe we just want green and purple, and we'll even get rid of the black. Black is just nothing. So now it's rotating through green and purple. Well, maybe that black was cool after all. So we're going to come up here, pick any color really, and take the brightness all the way down, which will create black. And you can now see that we'll call it a gap in between the colors. Well, wait a second. What if we had a gap between both of them? Good thinking. We create a new color, we turn it to black, and now we can click and drag the position of the color stops. So now we have green, space, black, space, green, space, black, space. So now we can add additional black gaps between our color stops. Maybe we want to throw some blue in there. So now we have green, we have purple, we have blue with some black gaps. Let's do one more black gap to put at the very beginning like the original preset was, just to keep things looking nice. Over on the lower right-hand side, we have some more settings. First is the length, and in this context, it's the length of that color bar that is coming down. So if we make that a bunch smaller, and we watch the preview, the little color bars are a lot shorter. Conversely, we can make them a lot bigger if we want. And it's actually longer, if you will, than the layout of lights that we have existing. Similarly, we'll bring this back down. We'll say 5. The distance is kind of the gap in between them. So if we bring that way down, it's going to push them closer together. And if we bring that way up, the gaps themselves are going to be much larger. And this is basically a tweak it to taste based on the effect that you're after. We'll come back down to 5 and 5. There's also this setting called phase, which in this particular effect is not super relevant, but think of it as changing the start point within this effect's repeating cycle. That'll make more sense with different effects. For this particular one, we'll keep that down. Fringe, for this effect is going to create kind of a fading tail. So rather than super bright blocks of color, the head, and I'll make this length a bit longer for the effect. You can see as the color bar drops down, the front of it is nice and bright, and the additional lights behind it start to fade out. So almost like a meteor type effect. Kind of interesting. And similarly, if we add noise, that fade out behind the light is going to it's going to be a little bit less consistent. And depending on the effect that you're creating, it might look a little bit more organic. This is not the best demonstration of that, but that's what they do. We'll go ahead and zero those back out again. And let's say hypothetically, this is the effect that we're looking for. I'm going to click back up in the preview area, and that will lock in that effect. So now when we select our uplights, we can see we have this color effect going, and the preview is reflecting that. Let's do another one, but for the wash lights. So we click on the wash light group, same old, same old. We're going to bring the dimmer up, and we're going to select a color effect. Let's say we want to see what this confetti looks like. Okay, let's pretend that's a good idea. So we'll click add on there, and we get a very similar looking interface. We have the duration. If we make that shorter, they're going to blink a lot faster. And if we make it longer, they're going to go really slow. Let's bring this down to 1 second. And you can see it almost looks like drops of water on a puddle, where they hit, they're bright, and then slowly fade out. Similar to the last effect, we have color options. We can change these out however we'd like. We can add them, we can delete them, we can duplicate them. That was an accident, but glad that we showed it. Let's get rid of some of these and say we've only got 2 colors. We got kind of a dark red and a pink and some black. And let's say we want to get rid of the fringe, so it's a bit more binary, I guess you would say, a bit more blinky. So let's pretend that's what we're looking for. We click again on the preview area, and it'll lock that effect in. So we have 2 completely separate effects running on 2 different groups of lights. Okay, let's explore some more color effects. Let's say we changed our mind about this effect on the uplights, so we're going to do something different. We select our uplights, we click on effect, and we are brought back to the effect editing page. First thing we want to do is come up here where it says color effect. We're going to add an effect. And we'll take a look at some of the different options. We have this jellyfish, which is kind of interesting. It's a bit slower and more organic. We've got kit. If you know, you know. If you don't, Google it. We have some other ones. Purple rain's kind of cool. But if we look at the bottom of the list, we see these kind of graph looking icons. What are those about? Well, let's explore. We're going to click on birthday party. We'll actually double click to get it activated, and it's going to bring up a dialog box saying, bro, you've already got an effect on here. What are we doing? Well, we got the option. We can either replace it or we can do an overlay. I'm not going to get into overlay right now. Stacking multiple effects can get pretty intense. It's cool that you can do it, but today we're just going to go ahead and replace it and see what this birthday effect has to offer. So we have our same duration setting over here, so that's going to make it go faster or slower. But in the middle, we've got this graph thing going on. What's this about? Well, if we look at the horizontal axis, we've got from 0 to 100%, and that's just where it's at in the cycle. And on the vertical axis, we've got a spread out color wheel. And what that means is, as this little dot is moving around the graph, wherever it lines up vertically on the rainbow is the actual color it's going to display. So if we look at the preview, we can see the colors are smoothly changing through all of the rainbow colors. We'll notice also that they are broken up in that the colors next to each other are quite different, and it's making kind of a confetti type effect, which might be what you're looking for. Or we can change the time offset, which is going to change how the individual lights are spread along that curve. So if we make the offset much shorter, we can see that the colors are a little bit more grouped together in the preview. If we go the other way, let's maybe like 50%. Now it's just all over the place. Well, let's fine tune this a bit. Let's bring the time offset down to say 2%, and let's change what's going on with this graph thing. Before we make changes, we need to notice that there's actually multiple pages, or tabs, I guess, to this graph. Right now we're on hue, but we can do something similar with saturation, with brightness, as well as the amber diode. Now, currently for this effect, amber is all the way down, so we're not using that at all. And brightness and saturation both are maxed out. And for what we're doing, that's cool, but we can change all of these independently if we want to. We'll go back to hue, and we can see the fact that this sine wave is going all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom, meaning at some point, each light is going to have every single color displayed on it. Well, maybe we just want a thin slice of color that it's going to rotate through. What would that look like? Well, we can do a couple things. We can either individually move these points, but that's going to be kind of tedious. We can also right-click anywhere on the graph and click Transform Curve. Now that gives us these transform handles. So if I bring the bottom handle up, say halfway, and we'll bring the top handle down just a little bit like that, we can see now that we're only between this kind of purple fuchsia and a light blue. So those are the only colors that it's going to choose from as it's cycling through this sine wave. We click outside of the transform box and it locks that in. And we can see our little dot moving around, indicating what color that it's on. So if we change up the offset, no matter how far we go, it's only displaying the colors in between this little sliver. Let's bring that back down. Well, down to 1. Keep everything nice and close together. So if, for example, we know that your event is, maybe it's got a green and yellow color theme. Well, if we right-click, we transform the curve, we can slide the whole thing down to line up more with yellow and green. And let's spread this out a little bit. So now as we're rolling through these colors, we have constrained it to just be yellow and green. Let's speed that up a bit just for funsies. We'll come down to a 5-second duration. And now it's cruising right along. Now, if we wanted to, like I said, we can change these individual dots. So let's take this one. We're going to bring it all the way up. And you notice that this part of the graph here is going down below the 0%. What do we do about that? Well, if we double click on any one of these dots, it's going to change back and forth between this straight line that we just created and a curved line. So this top one, we'll double click on that and it creates a curve for us. So it kind of depends on what effect that you're looking to do. Maybe we want to do something similar here. We'll straighten out this guy and make it poke all the way up. So it's really up to you how you want to design this particular curve to suit your needs. Maybe we've got too many dots. If we right click on a dot, we can get rid of it. Maybe we only want a couple dots. Let's get rid of most of these just to see what happens. And we'll get rid of this guy and maybe even this one. So we've only got these 3 dots. So we take this middle one, let's make it a really steep curve at first, or steep angle rather, and then nice and shallow as it goes along. And we'll double click and we'll round that out even. We might have to bring it back down to tame it a bit. Although you'll notice, as it rounded out, it put the apex of the curve more towards the middle, and that's not what we're looking for. So as we hover over the line, we get this hollow dot. When we click on that, and then we got a brand new dot. So we're going to move that one over, and we'll get this just to kiss the top. I don't know. It's an example. You get the idea. Let's maybe transform this again, and we'll shorten that up, and we'll slide the whole thing down to the bottom. Maybe that's what we're looking for. So now we're going from red up into green and all of the hues in between. Let's go ahead and commit to that. Funky effect that it may be. This might actually work for Christmas or something like that. Anyway, That is the gist of a color generator that uses a graph versus the individual color stops. Now let's spend some time exploring the generators themselves. Before, when we grabbed an effect and started to modify it, that was based on an existing preset. Well, the presets are built from the generators, so let's take a look at those. I've cleared out all the effects, so I need to reselect my uplights and bring the fader back up. We'll then go to our dropdown, click on Color Effect, and let's start with Scroll. Yes. We'll double click on that to start it off, and we can see we have a basic chase. What is a chase? This is a chase. This shows you a very good example of what a chase is. It's just a block of lights that boom, 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 step down and animate down. This is currently set from top to bottom. I'm going to change this to by address to give us a little bit more resolution. So this is wrapping all the way around the room, and we can see currently we have 3 different colors, and each color is using 3 different lights. Let's tweak some of that to see what that looks like. We're going to click on this red, and we're just going to make all these a little bit more saturated so it's easier to see on the video. So now we've got a red, a gold, and a blue, and they're just marching their way around the room. Not bad, not great. If we increase the number of steps, we can then see that each color is lighting up more lights at a time. We can bring that back down. If we go to the time offset, it's currently set to 100%, and you probably want to leave it there, but if you change that, then it kind of takes it a little bit out of sync, and it takes a minute for the chase to actually wrap around the room, rather than robotically and choppily jumping from each color. But typically, we'll leave that on 100% because that's really the effect that we're going for more often than not. Then the delay, we're not going to worry about the delay for now, but we are going to take a look at the smoothness. As I said before, this is kind of a choppy effect, and that might be what you're looking for. But if it's not, if you want to smooth it out some, we can crank this all the way up and see how gracefully all the colors are fading through. To me, that's a much more elegant look, and again, depending on the event, this might be the right move for you. So that's just one of the generators. If we click on Chase, we see a whole bunch of other generators. Let's try Scanner. And we're going to change these colors up just again to make it a little bit easier to see on the video. So I'm going to make this first one black. The first square on most of the effects is going to equate to what would be considered the background color. So what we have are 2 colors that are alternating between rocking back and forth across all of the lights, like a scanner. If, for example, we got rid of this blue, then it's just going to be yellow bouncing back and forth. Most of the settings are similar as before. If we want a longer color bar, we increase the length. And if we want a shorter one, we decrease it. Same as before, we can lower the duration to increase the speed. And we'll bring that back up. And one part that I think is really handy specifically for the scanner effect is the fringe. If we turn the fringe up, and let's increase the length a little bit so we can see this better, we see that the very front edge of the scanner part of the lights going around is nice and bright, but the following lights are a little bit dim, so you get kind of a faded out effect, which I think looks very nice. Let's keep looking. We've got yo-yo. So the yo-yo, as you can see, it starts on one end slowly and then quickly goes around, touches the bottom, and comes back up. So for example, if I were to make this top to bottom, this would feel a little bit more like a yo-yo. Starts at the top slowly as gravity takes over until it hits the bottom and then comes back up. So there's an actual acceleration built into the movement here, which is kind of cool. Let's throw another color in there just for funsies. So it's going to alternate between that golden color and then red's going to come up. We can change the center of it. Now what that means is as the calculations for the acceleration are worked out within the computer, right now it's figuring the center is 50%, which is normal. That's why it looks like it should. But if we change that, let's say we bring the center back down to 12%, you can see it slams down to the bottom and then slowly winds that yo-yo back up. Similarly, if we go to the other end, it's going to slowly unroll and then whip right back on up. As always, depending on the effect you're looking for, that could be nice and handy. But generally, we'll leave that at 50%. The steppiness, if we turn this down, now we lose that acceleration. Now it's just more of a straight down, straight back up. So if we say want to get rid of some but not all of the acceleration, maybe the effect is a little bit too much. So if we bring in 50% steppiness, now we have a bit more of a subtle acceleration. Personally, I like it all the way up. Let's take a look at the next one. Fill. This is kind of interesting. So as you can see, it's almost like it's filling up a jar with the colored lights. So it starts from the top and fills in from the bottom. If we were to change this back to address ascending, it's going to go all the way across until it fills up all the lights and then start over. Interesting effect. Rain. This one's super useful. It may not look it right from the beginning, but we can do some cool stuff with this. So as you can see, we've got blocks of color going around our setup, and the front edge of the block of color going around is bright, and there's a faded out tail behind it. Cool. Well, what we can do with the rain effect, if we change the fixture order to random, either fixed or variable, now it almost looks like we are looking down from the top at little splashes of color. So it's almost as if we're looking at a window that has raindrops that are dropping down onto it. Let's add another color, and let's make the distance a little bit lower, or rather the length a little bit lower and the distance. So now it's a little bit more dense of a raindrop. Conversely, we can make it a little bit more thin, so they're just randomly popping around the room. Phase, fringe, and noise, same as before. Adjust those to taste. And frankly, this is in fact, let's do this. Let's take this first color, which, as I said, is our background. We'll change that to, how about blue? And we'll go, say, 75% brightness. Kind of tough to see. In fact, let's change that color again. Let's make it pink. So we can see that the quote-unquote background is a kind of dimmed out pink, and then there's little bright flashes of the other colors that are popping up. Another use that application that you could use this for is to make kind of a sparkle type effect. So let's say we are doing we'll leave this at kind of a purple, and we will copy this color. So right click and copy. We're going to right click and paste on the second color. Drops at the end, that's okay. We're going to drag that over here. We'll edit that and bring it up to full brightness. And then we're going to get rid of the rest of these colors. And what that's going to do is give us the same color, but little pops of brightness going around the room. So as we're looking at this, the colors are not changing, and we'll make this a bit more dense. It's just more of a sparkle effect. So this can be a really nice subtle one that keeps things elegant, but still has a little bit of movement going on. After rain, we've got meteor. This one I haven't found as much of a use for, but the gist of it is it's adding a bit of what they're calling random noise, so that when something fades out, it's not super smooth, it's a bit more organic, almost like there's a film grain or something of that effect that's baked into the animation. Sparkle, similar to rain, basically does the same thing, but sets it up for you. We can change out the colors. Let's make this more of a blue, just so we can see it a little bit better. And is that fully bright? That is fully bright. How about a blue? There we go. So we can see that popping around, similar to the other. This has also a fringe. So if we take the fringe all the way out, then when the blue pops on, there's no fade whatsoever. It's just pop, pop, pop. Personally, I like the fringe. Makes it look more organic. And we can also change how long that when the blue comes on, how long it stays on for before it fades away. You can go really quick with that. Pop, pop, pop. So if we were to do something quick like this definitely has a sparkle factor to it. Let's see what the next one is. Fire. This is an interesting effect, not super applicable to things like uplights, but if we are using let's say an Astera tube that has a whole lot of pixels crammed close together, we can actually create a pretty passable simulated fire effect. I won't go into it here, but this is made to generate a faux fire type of a look. It's kind of interesting. Neat that it's included. Next to that, we have jellyfish. This is kind of the opposite. This is a super slow, organic, honestly, a very blobby type of effect. Let's change these colors up to see what's going on. Let's do, how about, yeah, green, gold, and red. We're going to want to speed this up a bit just so we can see what's happening. But this is the type of effect that you would use where you don't want to necessarily call attention to the effect. We just want to keep things ever so slowly changing throughout the room. We can bring the size down so there's little guys popping around. And really just think of it as blobs of color kind of mushing their way across your lighting fixtures. After jellyfish, the last one is snakes. And let's take a look at this. Let's minimize these colors again. So we're going to turn the first one black. Boom and boom. So that's our background. And now we've just got yellow and red snakes. Now the thing with snakes is similar. It's got the bars of light that cruise around your install, whichever direction it's going. But this is going to choose randomly the length of the snake as well as the distance from the next snake. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Under length, you can see where it says 2 to 20. So it's going to either be 2 lights long all the way up to 20 lights long. Let's say we only want it to be between, say, 10 and maybe 5. And the trick here is you need to move the mouse toward the edge that you want to change, either the lower or the upper edge. We'll do the same with the distance. We'll go between 5 and 10 for the distance. And let's slow it down a little bit. Let's check our fixture order. Instead of random, this is why it's not looking great yet, we're going to go ascending. So now we can see the snakes wrapping around the room. And if you look, like that one was what, 5 lights? That was maybe 8. This one's probably a full 10. So it's a random length and a random space that will move around the room. Something like this would be cool if we did, say, a top to bottom. Maybe they are getting ready for a grand entrance, or we're trying to direct everybody over to the dance floor. This is creating a definite feeling of motion to move people through the room over to wherever it is you're trying to direct them. But yeah, snakes is kind of a cool one. I think there's some definite use there. And let's see, that was the last generator. So that's a quick peek at the generators. You're always more than welcome to start out just with some presets and tweak from there. But if you have an idea, you can either start with one of the color spot generators or one of the graph-based generators. Ton of flexibility, ton of options. Really, it's just up to your imagination. So we've had a look at the effect generators with the colors, including some of their presets. Well, if you're a nerd like me, you might be wondering, hey, can we use some of those generators on the dimmer? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Let's take a look at that. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to select all the uplights. I'm going to bring the dimmer up just so we can see what's going on, and we'll change them to this color here. Similar to the color controller, if over the dimmer controller we hit this drop down, and we can come down to dimmer effect. And you'll notice this is same old generators. We're just going to apply them to the light's brightness rather than the color. So for example, we have the barn doors. Let's say we go with that. We're going to click add, and we're back to a familiar set of controls. One option that might be useful in this instance, rather than turning the lights all the way off and then all the way on as the animation proceeds, we can select this black square and maybe we'll bring it up to 50%. Ooh, there's 50. So now way that they're always on to some degree, they're just not as bright when the animation is not rolling over it. Also worth noting with these faders, these are actually set to follow a human's perception. And what I mean by that is right now we're set to 50%, but the level looks like it's almost 3/4 the way up the fader. Well, the way human perception works when it comes to light is it's a different sensitivity as the light itself gets dimmer. So it looks kind of weird, but when you're using the faders, it actually feels pretty natural. So I appreciate the fact that Lightkey took the time to put that in. Anyway, let's say we want to go with this for our animation. Cool. Same as last time, we just click out onto the preview workspace and we have our animation. Well, since these two effects are separate, we can actually keep the animation the same, but maybe we want to change up the colors. Maybe we wanted to put some fanning in there, like a gradient. Well, we can do that as well. Let's change this to, say, that similar pink, and we'll bring this one down to maybe a blue. We will click out to commit that, and we can see now that we have that color gradient, but the dimmer holds the same animation. So in that sense, we can kind of layer up these different effect generators to create the exact look that we're going for. Very flexible, very powerful. Let's do another one using some of the other generators. This time, however, we're going to plan ahead a little bit. What I'd like to do is for the uplights, we're going to have a rolling rainbow type effect for the colors, and we're going to add some sparkles with the dimmer effect. Then for the wash lights, we'll use a static gradient, or fanning as they call it, and we'll do a different but a complementary dimmer animation for those. So everything looks good together. First step is to select our uplights. We'll bring the dimmer up so we can see what's going on, and we will add a color effect. And for this one, we're going to come down to Rainbow Wave. That's a good start, so we'll double click on that. And then we're going to select a different template for the graph. We're going to select a sine wave. Cool. So that has the entire rainbow rolling through, but we don't want to have all the colors. We just want some of them. So we're going to transform this curve, and we're going to bring this bottom line up to 180 degrees, or just half of the rainbow. So now we've got reds, purples, and blues, and no greens and yellows. Perfect. So we select out of that. Colors are looking good. Let's add some sparkles. We select the uplights again, go to the dimmer, add a dimmer effect, and this time we're going to select droplets. So we bring up the droplets, but what we want to do differently is rather than the lights being all the way off, we want them to be on all the time and sometimes just a little bit brighter. So we're going to take the black square and bring that up to 70%. So the lights are always on with little bright flashes here and there. And we'll select out, and that is the effect we're looking for there. Awesome. For the wash lights, we'll select those. Again, bring the dimmer up so we can see them. And this time for the color, we're just going to add some color fanning. And let's change these colors. Let's do a light blue down here. And up top, we'll just do more of a purple. Looking good. Let's select out of that. So there's our colors. Now we just need to add a dimmer effect. And for this one, let's do barn doors. And it looks like, we'll select that. It looks like our fixture order is, nope, that's what we want. This brings up an excellent point. Some of the lights, the little previews that they give you, even if the light is all the way off, it's going to show the color that's been assigned to it. So if we can see these glowing edges, those are when the lights are actually on. However, when the lights are off, we still see this preview color. All of which is to say, this is just a generalized preview, and you want to test it on the real lights to make sure it's doing what you want. But I can see this is doing what I want. I think we'll speed it up a little bit, so they're moving kind of quick. And that looks good. So we select off of that. We have a rolling rainbow with our selected colors for the uplights, doing some nice sparkles. And then we have this barn door animation that is animating a gradient of color or a fanning of color of our choosing. Now let's take a look at programming the moving heads. going to select the first one, and we'll bring the dimmer up. And let's assign a color to it. Let's do blue. So now we can see the little icons blue. That's cool. I'm going to turn the gobo wheel to wide open. Make sure that the shutter is open. And we're not going to use any prisms just yet. But wait a second. Shouldn't there be a light beam or something to show us what's going on? Well, you're absolutely right. There should. And that brings up the first kind of gotcha or quirk when it comes to programming moving heads in Lightkey. And that simply is the fact that amongst all these controls that we have access to down here, we don't have control, or we don't have access to the position control. I don't know why they did it that way, but that's okay. It's easy enough to find. We can either right-click on the light and choose position, or if we hold down the shift key and then hit P for position, it'll bring it up as well. Let's take a look at that. So this is our position control. And the reason we can't see a beam is because right now the quote-unquote beam is pointing straight up at the ceiling, so it's basically pointing right at us. To change that, if we click in this ring, it's now going to reorient where the moving head is pointed. And let's see if we can make this. We'll make this white so we can see the beam better. And wherever we point the beam is where it is. If we bring this all the way towards the middle of this ring, then like I said, that's straight up. If we go out to this 90, and it kind of clicks into 90 degrees, that's shooting out perpendicular to the fixture itself. However, if we have the moving heads mounted on a truss totem, like we often do, pointing straight out might shoot right over everybody's head on the dance floor. So we got to point it down a little bit more. So we just keep going to the very outer edge, and now we're pointing at the floor. Now we've got a beam that we can actually see, so that's going to help out with programming a bit. Let's play around a little bit more before we get into actual movement animations. So we click off of the little position wheel there, and now if we select different colors, the beam changes. That's fantastic. If we select a gobo, it's going to indicate which gobo position it's on. So fourth gobo, we can see the little 4. However, it doesn't know what the actual gobos you have installed in the light, so it doesn't preview that. It just gives you the number. We'll go back to no gobo at all. We also have a couple of prisms that we can play with. And again, the preview doesn't reflect that very well. So you're going to have to look at the actual light to see what kind of prisms and gobos you have available. We'll go back to no prism on either of those. If we want, we can activate a strobe. And the way that works is it's strobing very slow right now. If you click and hold, you can then drag and speed up or slow down the strobe if that's an effect that you're going for. We'll take that away and go back to wide open. It also has a pulse option, which is kind of like a strobe, but it's fading up and down rather than blinking. And the same thing holds true if we press and hold. We can either speed up or slow down the rate at which the pulse goes. Back to wide open. Let's change up the color. And I think now's the time to talk about movement. Now let's take a look at what our movement options are when it comes to animations. So we'll get back to our position dialog either by right-clicking and choosing position, or like I said, Shift P will get you there. So here's our little aiming circle, and we can move that around. But what about an animation? Well, no problem. We've got some cool tools for that. If we click on the drop down in the position dialog box, we have the option for a position effect. And similar to the other effect generators, we've got some presets that we can click on to preview and then double click to add it. Got a few different shapes here to play with. Let's start with this bow tie. And you can see here's the path that the animation is taking. Now, that's cool and all, but it's pointed the wrong way. How do we fix that? No problem. If we click on this little direction arrow here, we can now click and drag to move the whole thing pointing forward. What if we want it to go a bit wider? We can grab these side handles and stretch out the limits of the animation. We can do the same with up and down. So we can bring this all the way down here, and then we'll take this one, So it gets a little bit closer to pointing at the ceiling. So now we have a broad animation sweeping through. If we want, we have the option to flip either the pan or the tilt values. If you got the general movement right, but you want it to go in the other direction, you can do that. We'll leave this one as is for now. And if we click out of here, we can now see our animation in the preview. Let's try another one. Let's scroll up and try half flower. That looks cool. Click on edit. And again, it's pointing the other direction. So we're going to change that. Going to roll this around so it's pointing forward. And for this one, let's constrain it a bit so it doesn't go quite so far side to side. Maybe like that. And we'll even bring this upper limit down a bit so it's mostly pointing forward. Okay, cool. And that's how easy it is to change up the animations. But what if we want to animate all 4 lights together? We can certainly do that as well. Before we do that, though, it is important we need to clear this movement out first. Then we'll be able to create movement patterns that all of them will follow. But if we try to animate them all while this still has its movement, it's going to have a conflict. So that's super easy to do. We're going to right-click on the light. We're going to clear out the properties, and that zeroes all that stuff out. Now, if we select all the moving heads at once, and we're going to reset to make sure the settings are the same on all of them. So we'll go back to our green. We got the dimmer up. Gobo wheel is open. The shutter is open. Nothing with the prisms. Okay, cool. So now if we right-click, go to position, and we'll click this forward. There's all 4 beams pointing forward. Great. What about an animation? Same procedure. We're going to add a position effect. This time, what should we do? Let's do, how about wedge curved? Why not? So when I click on that, same as before, let's get this pointing forward. And we will get it also pointing down as far as it can go. And let's maybe constrain it a little bit so the effect is just going forward. Okay, cool. Well, with that, we have a really cool option here, and that's the time offset. Currently, they're all swinging back and forth at the same time, and that can be cool if that's the effect you want. However, we can add a time offset between them, a small offset, which gives this kind of a follow the leader effect, which can be really attractive. This is a cool look, and the ability to program it this easy is worth the price of admission right there. Super awesome. We can also change it with a larger time offset so they look a bit more synchronized, such as, since there's 4 lights, let's go 25%. So now you can kind of see how it rolls through, and each light is in a different position in the animation, but still coordinated. Well, if we go to, say, 50%, now they're synced up, but 2 are doing one thing and 2 are doing the other. A lot of flexibility here. You can do some cool stuff. If we go to, say, 75%, now we get a little bit more of a random looking vibe, but they're still moving together. Or honestly, my favorite is a low value, so we get this follow the leader effect. Super cool. So we'll click out of there, and we'll select our lights again. Let's change up the colors. Let's go blue, and hypothetically, we could put a prism on them, and whatever else we want to do. Additionally, yes, we can absolutely put a dimmer effect on these. Let's do that. So let's do, how about can? Let's see what that looks like. So this is going to wag back and forth between every other moving headlight. This could be a cool effect. What if we take it out of phase? It doesn't really do much for this particular effect. How about a delay? That's 100%. What about something closer to 50%? Oh, now that's kind of interesting. Point being, sometimes you just got to fiddle with the settings until something cool happens. Maybe we'll throw another color stop in here, a dimmer stop, and we'll set it to 50%. So now we have the option of the light's all the way off, it's all the way on, or it's half on. Not too shabby. We can speed it up. Oops, that's actually slowing it down. If we make the time shorter, it will speed up. And let's say that's what we're after. Click into the preview, and now we can select them all individually to give them different colors. Let's maybe make this one purple, and we'll make this one red, just for fun. Awesome. If you had to program that effect by hand with every movement for every light, it would take forever. But Lightkey has the awesome generators that it does and allows us to put together a really elegant effect, or a really lively effect, based on whatever you're after, with ease. Let's talk about presets. What a preset is it's essentially a snapshot of any of the settings that you've changed for any of the fixtures, or what they call overrides. And what the heck does that mean? Well, if I select the uplights and I bring the dimmer up, we see we got this little blue dot here. That's indicating we have an override. So if I turn that all the way up and then say we turn this kind of orange, we get another blue dot, which means that is yet another override. So what we could do is come over here to the plus icon, and it will automatically detect the color that you're using and name it for you, which is pretty slick on Lightkey's behalf. And then it's listing all of the overrides that it's saving for you. In our case, both the dimmer and the color. So if I hit enter, now we've got a new preset. The challenge is, however, sometimes it's better or more efficient to actually combine different types of presets. And what I mean by that is maybe you want some presets for colors, some for gradients, some for for moving head movements, and other different color combos. If we tried to create a snapshot for every possible variation that we might want to use for a given setup, it would be thousands and thousands of presets long and completely unusable. But instead, if we construct our presets like ingredients, it's then going to make our cue creation for playlists much more efficient. Let's play around with some of these presets to hopefully clarify what I'm talking about. So if we open up the Uplight Colors presets, and we'll say we go mint green, you'll notice that the lights went out. What the heck? I mean, it says that the color is being set, but I can't see anything. Well, that's because the color and only the color has been set. So if we select our uplights, bring the dimmer up, now we can see that green. Go to yellow, hot pink, etc. This is a good illustration of the separation that we have amongst these presets, which, like I said, essentially turns them into ingredients. Let's keep exploring. And you'll also notice when you click off of a preset, it goes back to the default. If you want it to stick, you need to click apply. Now, if I click away from it, it will stay there. Otherwise, a regular single click is just going to be a preview. So here's another good example of when the overrides can get in your way. This should be a gradient from blue to pink, but it's locked onto this red. Well, in order to have the preset take precedence over, we need to come down to the override in the color controller, clear that out. Now it will respect the gradient. It can kind of get a little bit tricky if you're trying to do everything with just presets. But that's why I broke them up into more ingredients type presets. So when it comes time to creating cues, it's going to go much faster. Let's keep looking. We also have some dimmer animations for the uplights. So we can do a can. But yet again, we have our dimmers already overridden. So if we close that down, now we can see the can animation is happening. How about movers? If we click on the bow tie, we can see that the moving heads are indeed moving, but the light is not actually on, so we don't see the beams. We'll bring the dimmer up. Now we can see the booms. Now we can see the beams moving around. We can change this to the various different presets to see what it's going to do. But it's always going to want to revert back either to the overrides that were already on it or to the default colors. It's a little bit wonky, but it'll make sense when we're making playlists. We also have some color combos using the color gels on the moving heads. These can be kind of handy. And one thing that is going to be very useful when it comes to programming the moving heads is the gobos. As I mentioned before, the gobos don't actually show an icon of what the image is. They don't know what you have installed in your light, so it's just numbers. But at least for these particular moving heads, which we use fairly often, I gave a name to all the gobos, so at least we get a general idea. I want that sort of flower-shaped one. Yeah, that's flower number 3. Or the one with the 4 dots, or whatever the case is. For gobos, the presets are going to make things a whole lot easier. So rather than spending too much time mucking about with the presets, let's go over and look at the playlists so we can see how we can make the best use of presets. To get to our playlists, we want to go over to the live page. And if we hit this little drop down, we can bring up the Manage Live Pages. This dialog here gives us an opportunity to edit or create new or delete either cue lists or control panels. We'll talk about control panels in a little bit, but for right now, let's talk about playlists. I've already got one made here called Tutorial, and it doesn't have any cues in it just yet. So what does it take to make a cue? Well, as I mentioned before, these presets can be used as ingredients. What do I mean by that? Well, if we right-click in the open area here and select New Cue, we get this little window that opens up. And this is asking for essentially the different ingredients for this particular look. So let's say hypothetically, we are going to animate our uplights a bit. Let's do this elevator. So all we do is we click and drag and drop it into this little area here. So we're using elevator and we can stack these up. We can bring in the droplets for the actual dimmer animation. So now we can see that the dimmer is being animated, but the colors are being set by this elevator preset. Again, it's ingredients. Let's do some stuff with the movers. Let's do a bow tie follow. We'll drop that in there. Now this particular preset does include a shutter, which means it opens it up so we can see the beams as well as the position effect. So that's cool. We're going to color this up in just a second. Let's put some gobos on there as well. And we'll do the 3 dots. We'll drop that on top. And I think that's about it in terms of ingredients that we want for this particular look that we can pull from the playlist, but that's okay. This is a really good start. Let's finish it up. Right here, you're going to see ad hoc properties. This is the magic right here. If we click on edit, now we can tweak the rest of the items that we weren't able to accomplish with the presets. We can dial them in manually here and they will stick to that cue. So for example, let's take these wash lights, we'll bring them up and let's turn them purple. Okay. And then let's change the colors of these moving heads. So we'll make these outside ones blue, and we'll make these green. Okay, we got our colors. And let's select all of these and use prism number 1, just because I know that looks cool. And how about we call that our look? All right, so we've got everything set up the way we want it. It's kind of funky, but we're just doing a tutorial here. When everything is set the way you want it, you just click on Update. And there's our first cue. So let's take a look at this info box for this particular cue. What we're seeing here is we have the ad hoc properties. That's the stuff that we changed manually. And then it shows the various different presets that we used to build this out. And anytime you just click on one, it'll show you the exact properties that it's controlling. Okay, we scroll down a little bit more. Here we have our timing. So this is our hold time and fade time. We can change this on a per cue basis if we want. Right now we'll leave it at 10 and 2. That tends to be a good look in general, but you can change that if you need to. And down here are the modifiers. If you remember in the easy mode video, we took a look at the override settings, or modifiers as they call them, which gives us ability to tweak the colors and a few other things that are assigned to a cue without reprogramming the cue itself. Well, here's where we can select those. So let's say we want one for speed and one for dimmer. And we'll do one for hue as well, just for funsies. So if we close this info box, we'll see now that we have those same controls we saw in the earlier video. To get back to that info box, we right click on Get Info, and we're back where we were. The last thing down here we'll go over in a future video, but we can actually fire these off from an external device like a MIDI controller or a bunch of other bits of hardware that we can use to actually control the playlist without touching the laptop. Let's close this down for now, and let's create another cue. New cue. Oh, I almost forgot. We can rename these as well, of course. I'll call this Cool Cue, and we'll call this one, if you right click on it and hit rename, we'll call this a so cue, because it was just so I guess we better make this one super cool. All right, let's go through the process again. Let's start out with our uplights, and let's do some color animations. How about that? Let's do streamer. And again, we can't see them because we don't have a dimmer setting just yet, but we'll fix that with the ad hoc. And let's do another movement. This time, how about we do a ballyhoo? A ballyhoo is just kind of a wild, crazy, celebratory type movement for the moving head lights. Let's give them a color combo. We'll do spring colors like that. And how about, let's do a scrolling gobo wheel. So we're going to do clockwise scroll slow. So what that's going to do is that's going to roll through all of the different gobos that are installed on the moving head light. So we get to see all of them. All right, so let's say that's as far as we're going to get with the presets. So let's do some ad hoc. We right click, edit ad hoc properties. Now we can tweak the rest of this to taste. So we want the dimmer all the way up for the uplights. Oh, there we go. Let's do something cool for the wash lights. We'll bring that dimmer up as well. And how about we throw a gradient on there? Let's turn this one green, and we'll make this one a little bit warmer of a yellow, like so. And I'm having second thoughts about this color palette here up against these yellows and greens and oranges. Maybe you want to tweak that. So let's take a look at that. You know what? I take it back. Let's leave it just as it is. Good enough for tutorial. So we hit update, we lock that in, and we now have our second cue. So if we double click, we go to the first one, double click, go to the second one, hit play, and it'll cycle through all of them. Pretty darn easy. Ooh, this brought up a great point. Forgot to tell it to loop. It's important that usually you want your playlist to loop, so we need to set that to do so. To change the settings for an entire playlist, not just a cue, but the whole playlist, we want to right-click in an empty area of the playlist and then click Get Info. That'll bring up the info palette for the entire playlist. And here we want to make sure that it loops. So we check the loop box, and we're going to get rid of this crossfader. That's not going to be useful for us. Additionally, these plus and minus buttons, if you just click it one time, it'll get rid of the entire queue. I don't think we need to do that. We can always right click and get rid of stuff if we really need to, but we don't want to accidentally bump anything. All right, we got that cleaned up. We'll close up the info panel. Now we have a nice clean playlist that will continuously loop until we tell it to stop. Now, when we set out to create a full playlist for an actual event, we want to make sure we have a minimum of 12 cues, and ideally, we'll have 16 cues. And that's kind of a specific number, but that aligns with one of the external controllers that we like to use. We'll get to that section in a little bit, but it is possible to assign a physical button press to each and every one of the cues. And since our external device has a grid of buttons that's 8 by 8, if we fill up 2 columns of those buttons, we end up with 16. Nice and neat. The next thing we want to do is to create a control panel page. So we will go up here on the drop down. We will click on Manage Live Pages. Down here by the plus icon, we drop that down and we're going to select Empty Page. And we'll call that New Control. Hit Enter. This gives us an opportunity to set ahead of time the fade time for any of the buttons that we're going to create, although we can change those individually if we like. But for starters, we'll start this out at a 2-second fade for all the buttons. Okay. So we click done there. It automatically takes us to a blank page. So what is it we're trying to accomplish here? Well, we just need to make a handful of buttons that we can use during the event to move the spotlights to the first dance. Let's say there's a grand entrance, and maybe we want to have a strobe button for some special moment that we just want it to strobe for a few seconds and then go back to the regular programming. All right, so how do we do that? First thing we want to do is if we right click, or we can hit this little plus icon over here, but I usually just right click and we're going to make a new button. And these buttons are super flexible. We can scale them, make them nice and big, and if we're only doing a few, then probably you want to make them reasonably large so they're easy to see. We can change the text in them. Let's make this one the strobe. Hit enter. And then over on this little dialog box over here, we have, again, a whole bunch of options. As I mentioned, we can adjust the fade time here, but it goes to our 2-second default that we created. We have some options as far as how the button itself functions. We can make a push button like we have now, or we can create a fader that's either horizontal or vertical. The button itself can either toggle, meaning you click it once and it stays on, you click it again and it turns off, or if we choose flash, then it will only be activated when the button is pressed. And as soon as you release the button, then it stops doing whatever it was programmed to do. And for a strobe, that's the option that we're looking for. The priority, now this may have to override some existing programming, especially something like strobe. So we're going to give this the highest priority so it takes precedence and we get that strobe going when we want it. Color, usually automatic is fine, but we can select a color here. Let's say, I don't know, let's make it green. The alignment is with regards to the text. So if we align left, the text goes over there, etc. We're going to keep it in the center to look nice and clean. We can even adjust the fonts. And typically, I like to have a bold font for the buttons. So we'll make that bold. We can have it automatically activate on startup or before we quit. We're not going to use that. And we have the option to create some modifier objects similar to what we did on the cues. Don't need that for this one, but that will come up later. Okay, so what the heck do we want this thing to do? We can, just like with the playlist, we can grab presets and drag those down to start building out the actions of the button. But for what we're doing, we're just going to do everything ad hoc. So we will right click, we will edit the ad hoc properties, and we'll start selecting fixtures. The first thing we have, actually, let's start with the wash lights because I know these have a built-in strobe function, and we are going to utilize that. So we're going to make sure that the dimmer's all the way up. And for this case, we're going to make it all white. You can do what you want, but we'll just say we want to have it white. Then we're going to click on strobe, and we're going to click and press to increase the strobe amount to get the desired effect. Let's say that's what we're looking for. Okay, wash lights are strobing nicely. Now we'll grab the up lights. We're going to turn the dimmer up on those. We'll turn them all white. However, they don't have a built-in strobe function, at least not one that's exposed right now. So we are going to make use of a dimmer effect for that one. Let's see, what's going to be the quickest way to do this? Let's do, I think beat flash and beat flash times 4 is not exactly what we're looking for. I think we could do it with barn doors, but that would be kind of an odd effect. We could can really fast. Let's do that just for a little extra flair. So if we bring the time way down, we basically have a strobing effect. Now I see that the bottom 2 on each side is not selected. This appears to be some type of a quirk within Lightkey that's been happening on occasion. Sometimes it works, sometimes it deselects these 2 for some reason. I don't know exactly why that is, because it allows me to select them, but as soon as I click on the effect, it jumps over. So for now, we're going to pretend that's not the issue. By the time you're actually setting this up at work, that should be all sorted out. Okay, so the last thing is the moving heads, and they have a strobe built in as well. So we're going to turn those all the way up. We are going to turn it white. The gobo goes to an open gobo, and let's put prism number 2 on there just to make it a little more interesting. And then of course the strobe. And we're going to bring this up. And, oh, you know what? I only grabbed the one, so we can see this guy strobing here. We need to grab all of them so that the strobe matches. And then we'll click and drag, move this up a bit, and let's say about that fast. And it looks like we need to make sure, and I can tell that the dimmer was only active for this first one because it didn't have the blue dot. And this is a good way to double check as you're bouncing around between the fixtures that you're programming. If it doesn't have the blue dot, then the selected fixtures are not registering the changes that you've made. So we'll click on white again, we get our blue dot, and now we can see all of them blinking white. Perfect. And I think that's all we need for this effect. So we're going to click on update. Now, when we press on the strobe button, everything goes off in a nice strobe, and we release and it goes away. But you notice it took a couple of seconds. Specifically, it took 2 seconds because that was the preset. So for the timing, we're going to 0 both the fade in and the fade out. Bring that down. So 0 for both. Now when we press and hold, it activates immediately, and as soon as we let go, it goes back. Next, let's create a button that activates a dance floor spotlight. So we'll pretend that our dance floor is in the middle of the room here, and we want to activate the spotlights for all the moving heads and point them at the same spot on the dance floor. Now we're going to do this virtually, but ideally you're going to actually be at the venue programming live so you can make sure that you're aiming the lights correctly. And in a perfect world, you'll have a teammate there that can stand in on the dance floor so you can make sure that everybody is well lit. So we are going to click on Edit. We'll right click, create a new button. Let's drag this over here, and just to keep things looking nice, we're going to align the edges and we'll make it a little bit taller, something like that. And if we click on the text, we'll say dance floor. And then let's take a look at our settings. For this, a 2-second fade in, fade out is what we're looking for. We want it to be a push button. We do want it to toggle this time. So when we press it, it turns on, and then we press it again and it turns off. Again, we'll bump our priority up to the highest. Color automatic, let's make this one light blue. Alignment center is good. We will turn the font bold. And that should be it for this particular button. Okay, so if we right click on our new button, click on Edit Ad Hoc Properties, and select our first light. So we want to turn it on. We're going to use a warm white gel just because that looks a little bit better. We're going to make sure our gobo wheel is wide open and the shutter is open as well. We're not going to use any prisms. So now all we have to do is aim it. Currently, they're effectively pointing straight up, so we can't see the beams yet. We're going to Shift P to get position. We'll click on here, and now we can see our beam. We'll drag this over to roughly the correct area. Again, our dance floor is supposed to be right here. And if we need more precise control, we can use the up and down arrows to nudge the lights where we want them. So if you got a teammate standing on the dance floor, you can nudge these until they are adequately lit. Okay, that's the first one. We'll move on to the second one. Same procedure, all the way up, warm white, gobos open, Shift P. There's that aim. We'll bring it over a little bit. Number 3, dimmer, color, gobo, position. And this one back a little bit. And the final one, dimmer, color, gobo, position. Get that somewhere right about there. We hit enter. Okay, cool. Everything looks good. This is what we're looking for. Then we click update. So now, when we click on the button, we can see the lights come up. They all move and aim to the dance floor. And if we click it again, they slowly fade away. Very nice. Now for another button, let's say hypothetically, we have a grand entrance that we want spotlights for as well. How do we do that? Well, the procedure is the same, but we can take advantage of kind of a cool little feature in that if we click edit, we create a new button, we do the same stuff. We want to move it close by. We're going to make it the same height. We'll make it the same width. But this time, we're going to slide it right next to it. And if you see right there, that little red line, that means these two buttons are actually connected. And when buttons are connected, only one can be active at the same time, which is perfect for this use case. Okay, so we click on the text. We'll call this grand entrance. Don't need that. Okay, cool. And the procedure is basically the same. We want the same fade in time. That's great. Toggle is good. Priority is going to be the highest. We'll bold up those fonts. And then we will come over and we'll actually make this a little bigger to fit grand entrance. We will right click and edit the ad hoc properties. The procedure is exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these all at the same time to get the dimmer, the color, and the gobo all set. So those are all set. Now we just got to aim them. Shift P on the first one. Send that out. And we'll pretend that the entrance is going to come from the very back of the room. So dance floor is here. The entrance is back here. So these are going to be aimed a little bit higher. Shift P. Get that lined up. I want that kind of angle. Same. Kick this one back the other way just a touch. Shift P. And something like that. Okay, everything looks good. We click on update. Now, we click the button. There's our grand entrance. We click it again and it goes away. And if we click on dance floor, there's that one. However, if while dance floor is activated, we just click on grand entrance, it from that position moves right to our grand entrance. We can go back and forth however we want, or just click that button again and they go away. Okay, so we have our dance floor and grand entrance spotlight set. We've got a strobe button enabled. What else do we need? Well, I think it would be a good idea to have a specific look for when the grand entrance is going to happen. So let's create a button that just brings up a specific look that we can then either strobe or do spotlights over the top of. So we will click on Edit. We will create a new button. And let's call this, click on there, get it. There we go. Let's call this the Magic Look, because I can't think of a better name right now. We don't want to connect it with the strobe. It's going to be an independent button. Fade time is good. Push button good. Toggle is good. Go ahead and bump up the priority. Let's make this one purple. We are going to bold up the font again. And then start programming. Right click. Edit ad hoc. And I think what we're going to do here, we're going to pretend that the bride and groom really love the colors purple and blue. So let's make the uplights purple. We'll make the wash lights blue. And they're already blue, but we're going to make it a little bit lighter. And for the moving heads, we're actually going to leave those alone because they might be acting as the spotlights and stuff. So we're going to leave those off. We're just going to change the uplights and wash lights. Okay, great. Close that out. Magic Look. Everything comes on nice and slow and elegant. Uncheck it, and it goes back to normal. Very cool. So hypothetically, we're getting ready for the grand entrance. We flip it over to the Magic Look, and just before they announce the couple coming in, maybe we give them a little strobe action, and then we stop with the strobe because that can get annoying really quick. And then at the correct time, we click grand entrance. The music plays, everybody's excited, and the couple makes their way in. Sweet. All right, they're in. We're going to take those off so we're not blinding people's eyes. And we're going to leave this look for a little bit. And that's basically it. What else could we want? I know what we want. The final button that we're going to create is a blackout button. At the end of the night, typically what you're going to want to do when you get the go-ahead from the planner is to turn off all the lights at once. And wouldn't it be great if we could turn everything off with one single button? Well, you better believe we certainly can do that. So, same procedure, edit, new button. We'll call this blackout. In fact, we'll go all caps for that. We'll make it big and convenient. And we are going to, we'll leave the fade time, keep that elegant. Toggle behavior, absolutely. Highest priority. Oops, not that one. We want to bold the font. And for the color, I think it's appropriate to go ahead and make it red. Like that. All right, so that'll be our blackout button. We right click. We edit the ad hoc. And just start powering down fixtures. So it looks like these are already powered down, but notice it doesn't have our blue dot. So the programming has not been registered to this particular button. So we will click and then drag it all the way down. So now we can see our blue button and be assured that that programming has been locked in. Then we will move to our wash lights. Same procedure. We click and drag it down so we make sure we have our blue dot. Oops, didn't mean to click that. We can also, if we want to, if it has the option to close the shutter, we can certainly do that, and we'll do that for the movers, but it doesn't look like it's an option for the wash lights. So we will move on to said movers. We'll click on the dimmer, drag it all the way down. I like to clean things up by going to white and open gobo and making sure that the prisms are off. Since we're kind of putting these away for the night, we want to undo all the stuff that we may have done with the previous programming and put them in a more neutral state, including closing the shutter. And I think that's all we got to mess with there. We click on update, and now we have a blackout button. So if we click on blackout, everything should fade out, which again is kind of tough to tell in this preview. We can see that the wash lights do not have any glow around them. And as always, you want to look at the actual lights to make sure they're doing what you want. But if we click that again, they will fade back up to their previous settings and everything is looking good. Now, one final thing I want to do is I think I want to clean this up just a little bit so it's a little bit more user-friendly in terms of a layout. So we're going to click on Edit. Let's move these. I want to stack these on top of each other. So we're gonna kind of make a mess here for a second, and then we'll come back and fix it. So we'll start by putting the grand entrance up top here. We're going to take the dance floor, and this part's important to make sure that we get that red line, that they're connected. And we'll make it the same width so it looks clean. Awesome. Let's take the magic look and move it down below since they're related. We're going to put the strobe right in the middle, nice and easy to find. And the blackout button will be off to the side. Okay, let's scoot that a little bit. Maybe move the strobe down a notch. It's not quite even, so I'm going to make this blackout button just a little bit bigger so they're actually kind of centered in between each other. You can get as nitpicky on this as you want, but when you are happy with the layout, you click on Done, and there are your buttons. The last thing I wanted to show you is how to assign the buttons from an external controller to the buttons we've just created, along with just about anything else. We can externally control most of what's going on here in Lightkey. Now, typically, we use I believe it's an Akai APC Mini Mark II, which should be in with all the rest of the gear that we use for Lightkey. But this will work with any MIDI controller. So what do? First, we plug it in. So we got the Akai plugged in. Now, all we have to do is, for example, say we wanted to assign the blackout button to one of the buttons on the controller. We right-click on the button that we want to assign. We go down to External Control, click on Add Trigger. Now, it's going to wait for me to press the button that it wants to assign. Do like that. It automatically picks it up. It'll fade away in just a second. And now, anytime I press the button on the external controller, it activates the button here in Lightkey. Super, super handy. Let's take a look at some of the things we can control from the external controller if we want. All of these buttons, of course. The master fader, this is super handy, and for all the templates I've created, this is already assigned, but just in case something got messed up, it's definitely worth assigning the master fader to the controller. You can see here that that's already assigned. If we go over to our playlist, all of these can be assigned as well. There's our external control, which is already assigned to the controller. We can do that for each and every one of these cues. So as I mentioned before, the Akai has an 8x8 grid of buttons. So if we fill up 2 of those columns with 16 cues, we can at any time just press the button and it'll fire off that specific cue. Same holds true for the play button. We can externally control that, the pause, the fast forward, all kinds of stuff. So basically, you can lay it out however makes sense to you. If something within Lightkey has already been assigned, like I said, the master fader is already assigned, go ahead and leave that there. We would like to keep some of those things as consistent as possible. So if you jump onto someone else's Lightkey program, you know what buttons are doing what. But if you've made extra buttons, if you're doing extra programming and you want to assign it to the controller, you see it's just a piece of cake. And really that's it. I think now you have a strong grasp on Lightkey and you are ready to create, to program, and to launch your own light shows.